Hello everyone, today I'm going to be talking about extroverted sensing for INFJs. Of course, if you're an INTJ, then you might also relate to the stuff I'm gonna talk about in this video, because for INFJs and INTJs, extroverted sensing is their inferior function. I made a video earlier that talks about switching to the inferior function, and in that video I said that I was gonna make a part 2 video where I mainly focus on more talking about how to switch to the inferior function when you want to switch to it, or at least to just make it a bit easier. It would be really useful if you can switch to a certain function when you are doing a task that's also related to this function. So let's just say that if you are using the wrong function at the wrong moment, the wrong brain function that's activated, it's gonna be more difficult to do the thing that you wanted to do because you're just distracted by this other process in your brain that's going on that's just not very suitable for the thing that you're trying to do, right?
For example, in this video, we are focusing on introverted intuition and extroverted sensing, which both have a different purpose. Introverted intuition is useful for finding hidden connections and meanings and using your imagination, whereas sensing is useful for being connected to your senses and to the world around you in the moment. So you'll want to use these two functions, these two brain functions, in different moments. For example, when you're doing sports or when you're having a conversation, you'll want to use extroverted sensing. But when you want to create something using your imagination, you'll want to use intuition instead. Or when you want to try to predict the future.
That's why we all kind of need to be able to switch to our inferior function at least sometimes. And preferably at the right moment when you actually need it, right? Doing this, how easy it is, kind of depends on the person. I think especially for people who are a bit more balanced between introversion and extroversion, it's probably a bit easier maybe for them to switch to their inferior function than for the people who are less balanced, like the people who are more extroverted or the people who are more introverted, are gonna be switching, like, imagine switching between your first and third function a lot. And then the second function might get skipped a bit more often, and then the fourth function might also be a bit more difficult to reach. But in general, it's also the case that your inferior function is still, it's the opposite of your dominant function. So a lot of people might struggle with actually respecting this function and appreciating it. Then we also have the energy constraints. It's impossible for you to use your inferior function all the time. That's just not realistic because your brain is wired in a certain way that, like how introverts lose energy when they're have to be extroverted all the time, and the other way around for extroverts. At some point, you have a limit where you can't use your inferior function forever, but I do believe that we definitely can use it for part of the time, and we need to in order to be healthy and balanced people. And I don't really know why this is the case, but personally, I had this thing going on where I was actually not using extrovert sensing enough. I was, for some reason, having trouble with actually even accessing it.
So basically, what happened for me was that I think that when I was a child, I was actually using extroverted sensing the right amount and it was fine. But then when I got older and I started becoming a teenager, for some reason, I just started preferring my introverted functions more. And I think it might have something to do with social anxiety, maybe wanting to avoid interacting with people or something out of fear, and then preferring to be more introverted or something like that. But at some point, I wasn't using extroverted sensing like I used to use it, and at some point I didn't even know how to properly use it anymore, and I didn't understand like what was going on, because even as a child, for example, even though I was properly using it, I think I didn't know what it was. I didn't know how I was doing it, it was just natural. And that's why I want to make this video. It's because I think for most people, this kind of stuff, it's either natural for you or it isn't. And when it isn't, you have to relearn it basically. And that's really difficult, but it is possible. And that's what happened to me. So, of course, on the other hand, it's also possible that maybe when you develop into a teenager or into an adult, your brain changes in a certain way that maybe, for example, maybe I got more access to introvert intuition because maybe your dominant function isn't fully decided as child. I don't know how it works. So maybe I couldn't avoid this happening. I also don't know. And maybe using extroverted sensing becomes easier with age because I think generally with age we become more comfortable and with using our lower functions, right? As we get older. But at the same time, I don't encourage just waiting till you get older because practice really helps.
I had the ability to use it more often, but I just didn't know how to do it. I had the energy to do it. Like my brain was capable of doing it. I just didn't know how to switch. So that's why I thought, let's just make this video in case any other INFJs or like any people are struggling with that as well. The first thing I want to say is that it's not something that's easy generally because it's something your brain is doing. It's not something you have full control over necessarily. And with anything, of course, it might take some time. If you want to learn to build a new habit of activating different brain regions than you're usually activating, then it's gonna take some time, just like it takes time to build any new habit. So for me, in my experience, it's not something that I can literally just decide. You know, it's not as easy as moving around or saying something. It's a bit more difficult because it's just when I want to use introvert intuition, it always works because it's natural, right? But when I want to use extrovert sensing, it's not like it always works when I want to use it. But I just wanted to give some tips, you know, on how to make it easier so that at least you can learn to improve over time, right? I'll just talk about what I do to make this easier. So, first of all, what you can try to do is focus your attention on extrovert sensing, or I guess in general, on your inferior function, right? So try to focus your attention on extrovert sensing when you want to use it. Think about what it is, and one of the most important things is you have to fully understand what it is. And whenever you want to use it, you need to focus your thoughts on extrovert sensing and not on introvert intuition. So that's one thing that you need to do. You need to understand fully what it is. You need to understand how it feels to use it, and just try to focus on it. Try to block out introvert intuition because you also know what introvert intuition is, right? And just try not to focus on that in the moments when you want to use it. And I'm going to talk this whole video about what extrovert sensing is and in which moments you should want to use it. Secondly, you need to know how it feels to use extroverted sensing. So this is pretty easy. Once you've managed to use it, you will remember how it feels, right? So the only thing you need to do is manage to use it at least once in your life and then remember, right, what it felt like. So I'll first start with describing what it feels like. So I already talked about this a little bit in the other video. We talked about one energy thing that seems kind of, it's not very intuitive. It doesn't feel like it makes a lot of sense until you actually have experienced it, which is that actually you can feel, and you will feel energized by using your inferior function. And I believe that when you feel drained after using your inferior function, the only reason for this feeling of being drained is because switching to this function actually costs you energy. But whenever you are in this function and you are also doing something that's related to that function, then you will feel energized by it, and it will be enjoyable, and it will be fun. That's just a sign that you're using it. And if you feel like you're not having fun, you're tired, and you feel like you're hating it, but you might still think that you're using extroverted sensing because maybe you're doing an extroverted sensing relating task, I will explain to you like how this is possible, right? It's this thing that I used to have this confusion about for a long time, because it's easy to think that we are using a certain function when we are doing a task that's related to it. For example, when I was in school and I would go on a trip for school, right? Like, and be active, like walking around the city, having to talk with people, having to focus on the environment, having to focus on the people. And I remember absolutely hating it because I didn't even know how to use extroverted sensing. But I could have been thinking something like, okay, but I'm moving around, I'm doing things, I'm being active, I'm talking with people, so I'm using extroverted sensing then, right? Because that's extroverted stuff, that's not introverted stuff, right? But in reality, the reason why I hated it so much was because I wasn't actually accessing extroverted sensing at all. And I was constantly distracted by my own thoughts, which is a sign of being stuck in introverted intuition, right? And definitely a sign of not using extroverted sensing while you're doing an extroverted sensing task is just feeling really drained afterwards and really tired. The reason why this can happen is because you don't completely fully shut out your inferior function, I believe. For example, if I would completely shut extroverted sensing out when I was using introverted intuition, it would be kind of dangerous, because introverted intuition is about imagination, whereas extroverted sensing is about being connected to the world around you. So if I would completely shut out extroverted sensing, I wouldn't even see anything, right? I wouldn't even be aware of what's happening around me at all, which would be kind of dangerous, because if I would do that while I was walking on the street, I would just run into things all the time and I wouldn't even see where I'm going, right? But in reality, I will get lost in thought a lot, and I think a lot of INFJs can relate to this, where when you are, maybe say you're walking on the street, you can still get lost in thought, right? But you still kind of know where you're going. It's like your subconscious is taking care of the sensing stuff, but it's just not in focus. Your focus is on introverted intuition right now. It's the same thing when you're trying to talk to people, but you're not in sensing. You might be able to do it, but you might still be easily distracted because you're not focusing on it too much. I want you to imagine when you are using a camera, or think about your eyes, right? Or camera, when something is in focus or not. Like, for example, I'm in focus right now, I think, and then the background's not, right? It's more blurred. And when I'm looking at this pen, for example, I can look at it. Let's see if it wants to focus on it. It really doesn't, but like, imagine I would be looking at this pen, right? Then I can either look at it and I see the pen in focus, and I know the background is there, right? And I can even look at it, but it will be blurred still. And when I look at the background, it's clear. When I try to look at the pen while I'm looking at the background, I can't really see it. I can't see the details of the pen, but I still know that it's there. I still know that it's in front of me, right? And it's kind of the same way in my experience with using these two functions. It's like your brain doesn't completely shut it out, extroverted sensing, but it's not in focus. So if you try to do anything extroverted sensing related, it's just going to be very difficult. It's going to cost a lot of energy, and it's going to be a struggle, basically. So you can definitely get this illusion that I'm using it, right? I'm using extroverted sensing. I'm doing something that's related to it, even when you're not actually using it. And I had this problem a lot in the past. So then when you're actually using it, you're supposed to feel energized by it, because whenever you are using any function and you're also doing something related to that function, it's supposed to be fun and it's supposed to give you energy in that moment. Imagine you are an ESFP or an ESTP with dominant extrovert sensing. So they will constantly get energy, like all the time, from using extroverted sensing, right? Because it's their main thing. They can use it all day long and not get tired. And that's what they get their energy from. So, of course, as an INFJ, that's not going to be your experience, but your experience is going to be that you feel like this for maybe part of the day whenever you manage to use this function, and you have your limit. The difference is not that you can't feel happy while using it. You can. It's part of your functions, and you even have to use it sometimes in order to be healthy and balanced. But you have a limit, and the ESTP, for example, doesn't. They don't have a limit. They can use it all the time if they want. Just like you can use your intuition all the time if you want it. But you have a limit where at some point you can't use it anymore and it becomes too much and you get tired because you had to switch so much. Because in reality, what happens is that when you try to switch to extroverted sensing in moments that you have to use it, there will be moments when you also switch back by accident usually, or just because you needed to share your own thoughts about something. Because if you want to go introverted, of course you'll immediately be sent to intuition because that's your main function. If you have to share some kind of introverted insight about something, you're gonna have to go back to NI, and it's also gonna happen on accident, probably a lot. And in that case, you're probably gonna have to switch back again to extrovert sensing, and that process will cost you energy because it's not natural. What your brain naturally prefers to do is using introverted intuition. And I also noticed that in the beginning, when, for example, you are completely rested and recharged, and you have used introverted intuition a lot, then in the beginning it can be easier to switch to extroverted sensing when you are not tired, and it might be really easy to just keep switching back and forth, and you might feel like you're not losing a lot of energy. But at the end of the day, when you've done a lot of sensing, it's gonna start getting harder to switch. It's gonna start being more difficult and more draining to switch, right? Because your energy levels are just already going down. So anyway, that's one thing you need to know. You need to know how it feels. And one thing that you will feel is that it will be comfortable to use it. It will be enjoyable. It doesn't have to be that interesting, but at least it shouldn't feel tiring and you shouldn't feel like you hate it, you know? It should just be comfortable to use it. So then what you need to do is you need to focus on sensing in the right moments. Just focus your thoughts on it, focus your mind on it. Pay attention to energy levels. It's very important. Like I just talked about energy, right? So try to make sure you do have enough time and space to recharge, to be introverted, to use introverted intuition, so that you have enough energy to do this in the first place, right? And throughout the day, when you try to use sensing, just really pay attention to all your energy levels. Maybe at the beginning of the day, you feel like you have a lot of energy, everything's going fine. And then maybe at the end of the day, you notice that it's becoming harder to switch, maybe. You stay in intuition for longer, you might kind of get annoyed that it's not working anymore, maybe, and you might also just start feeling pretty tired. When that happens, you need to realize that, okay, maybe this is my limit and I need to recharge again. And I just need to go home and I just need to be in intuition for a while, maybe. So paying attention to your energy levels is generally very important because, first of all, you will know which function you are in, right? Because if you're in the wrong function, you're gonna feel more tired. And you'll also know when you should try to switch and when you shouldn't. Then, thirdly, or fourthly, or I don't even know which number, but next, practicing is also important. So realize that if this is really difficult for you, then you're going to need a lot of practice before it becomes easy. Like with anything, right? For me, I used to have small moments when it would work and I would be like really excited about it. Like I remember, I think this was like maybe 2 years ago or something. I would like be using sensing in a random moment and be really excited about it and think like, oh my god, I used sensing, you know, I did it. So this is what it's actually feels like, you know. And I would be like really excited about it. But it would be like just these little moments and I didn't really know how to stay in it. It would just be gone again. I don't know how to control this, right? So it seemed like it just happened when I was lucky. But over time, I've learned that I can use it more. But you have to practice, you know, and sometimes you have to get lucky, and then you have to manage to stay in it. Whenever you manage to switch, you have to manage to stay in it for as long as possible before you go back to NI. And you have to be able to do it over and over again. And the more you accidentally manage to do it, the more it will slowly become a habit in your brain and it will become easier to do it as well. So practice is very important, especially in the beginning. I would say, like, imagine you know that it's difficult for you to switch. You are not sensing all day. You are like struggling with accessing it maybe. You are stuck in your intuition for a long time. And then in that case, I would say, if you manage to switch a few times or just once, then try to stay in it for as long as possible. Try to stay focused on sensing for as long as you can. Because the more you manage to do it, the better you will become at switching. When I'm saying like you need enough time to recharge, I only mean this for the people who are already like sensing all day. They kind of know how to access it and it's working for a long time. Like if you manage to do that, then at the end of the day, you need to go back to NI to recharge, right? And you will, like you will be forced into doing it because at some point you're at your limit and you can't even switch anymore. But you still need to remember that imagine you don't have the space to recharge because you signed up for this long vacation for 3 weeks where you're constantly socializing with people and you're constantly doing activities and you're never alone, that maybe that is not a very good idea because you won't have any time to recharge anymore, you know? So if you want to focus your attention on sensing, you need to know all about sensing. So I'm gonna try to talk a little bit about extrovert sensing. And any function is very broad. It's very versatile. You can do a lot with any function. So sensing is not just one thing, it's many, many things, right? So I'll just try to summarize it a little bit. Sensing is connected very much to the body, whereas intuition is connected more to the mind. So remember that it can help when you're trying to focus your attention on sensing, try to focus on your body, first of all. So body senses touch. Touch is one that helps me a lot, personally, because this is something I don't do it naturally a lot. So secondly, environment. So extrovert sensing is a lot about being in the moment. So it's a lot about being focused in on your environment in that moment. You can focus on your body. You can also focus on your environment. So for example, what's happening around you? What's happening in front of you? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? And what are you feeling? So I notice this thing when I'm completely focused on sensing. I notice that I'll be looking at my environment and I see everything clearly. And it's kind of like watching a movie, but instead it's real, you know? But the most important thing to remember is you're just watching it. You're completely focused in on it and you're not thinking. And remember this, when it comes to any thoughts, all the thoughts you can have when you are in extroverted sensing, all the thoughts you can have can only be about the thing that you're seeing right now, or what you're hearing right now, or the conversation you are having right now. You cannot be thinking about anything else. You cannot be thinking about yesterday or tomorrow. So extroverted sensing is not necessarily the same as having no thoughts. It's more so about you either have no thoughts or you have thoughts that are concerned with the thing you are looking at. One important thing to remember is also that you won't be using extroverted sensing by itself, probably, because it's your inferior function. And do we ever really use one function at a time? Probably not, right? So you will probably, in practice, when you're using extroverted sensing, you will be using, if you are an INFJ, you will be using it together with extroverted feeling at the same time. And you have to realize that extroverted feeling will also give you some more information. And it's completely fine to focus on both at the same time, because they work together and they're both extroverted functions, and extroverted feeling should not push you away from sensing, because they can work together fine. So if you are using it together with extroverted feeling, you will also get information about maybe how the other person you're talking to is feeling, or whatever body language they are expressing, right? But that's not about your own thoughts, right? So when we are talking about your own thoughts and you're wondering, like, how does it work? Do I have to block out all my thoughts, right? When you're connected to extroverted feeling, you will still have access to your emotions a lot. So what can happen is that maybe you are sitting in a car or something, you're looking out of the window and you are looking at your environment. You're using sensing. You notice the buildings, you notice the people, then you might have some thoughts like about how beautiful the colors are, or you might be wondering something like, I wonder who this person is that I'm seeing who's walking around. I wonder who they are. I wonder why they're here. I wonder what they're doing, right? And stuff like that. When that happens, you are either going to feeling or you might be going back to intuition. But just remember that it's not a huge problem if you go back to intuition for a moment, as long as you manage to immediately get back to sensing and you can keep a sort of balance, Imagine it kind of like this, you are trying to focus on sensing, whereas your brain will pull you back into intuition because that's your natural thing, right? So when that happens, you have to still stay focused on sensing and pull yourself back into sensing. And that creates a certain balance that just keeps going on. So if you want that to happen, you just need to remember, just don't let your thoughts get too far away from what's happening right now. Ever. Just don't do that, because that's intuition, If you're having a thought, it has to be about what you're seeing. And just focus on when you need to use it, Imagine you are in a bus or something and you are looking out of the window. You have two options, right? Either you are focused on sensing and you're actually looking like, what's happening? What am I seeing, right? Or you are completely with your head, with your thoughts completely somewhere else. You're thinking about, 3 months in the future or something, or you're thinking about some kind of story in your head or something. And in that case, you're fully in intuition. And maybe that's fine too. Maybe you needed that. But then once you start getting up, once you start doing stuff, once you start being more active, once you start talking to people, you have to be able to go back to sensing and just switch again, right? Because that's the moment when you need to be able to use sensing. If you're having a conversation with someone and you're completely focused on them and what they're saying, And you're just responding kind of with what you're feeling in that moment, with extroverted feeling. And maybe you're going back to NI a little bit sometimes, but you still stay focused and you are definitely not thinking very deeply about anything. You're just thinking about the conversation in the moment, right? Then that's fine. So it's a very complicated thing to talk about, but that's just how it is. Cognitive functions are just pretty complicated. So let's get back to what sensing is all about. So we got environment. We also got taking in information. So this depends. If you're an INFJ or an INTJ, for example, then extroverted sensing is all about taking in information. But there's another function that's also about taking in information, which is extroverted intuition. So say you are an ENFP or an ISFJ or something, then the function you use for taking in information is not extroverted sensing. But if you are an INFJ, then extroverted sensing is the function you use for taking in new information. So if you're an INFJ, what can help to access extroverted sensing is focusing on taking in information. But one thing you really have to remember about this, because the problem is with intuition and sensing, intuition is also an information function. So sometimes it can be really confusing. But the main difference is that your sensing is about taking in information literally and taking in new information in the moment. So intuition works a bit slower. It doesn't take information in the moment. It just gives you information a bit more slowly, kind of as an afterthought, right? So when you're trying to learn something new, like right now, you have to use extroverted sensing. That's the most useful. If you try to use intuition, you will probably struggle because you're going to get distracted from what's happening and from what you're trying to learn. That doesn't mean intuition can't be useful, because intuition can be very useful to understand things. Imagine you're trying to learn something that's very theoretical, right? And it's something you really need to kind of be able to use your imagination for. Then if you are learning it, definitely intuition can be very useful to understand that information. But intuition is more useful for understanding things rather than taking in information. And that's just not the same, For example, if you're an extrovert sensor but you struggle with intuition, you can listen to a lecture about some kind of theory about physics that's really difficult. And you can think like, I completely was paying attention to what this person is saying, but I don't get it, or I don't understand it, maybe, right? And when you're an INFJ, maybe you notice that you were in intuition, and whenever you were paying attention, right, and you listened to what this person was saying, maybe you immediately understood it, what they're saying, but maybe because you struggled with sensing, half of the time you just were not paying attention and you were kind of just getting distracted, right? So that's kind of how it can happen. And if you really want to try to learn something new, it's better to be able to access extrovert sensing. And just remember that it's about taking in information literally, as it is. It's about no interpretation. Interpretation is intuition. Just remember that. So no interpretations, just literally listening to what someone's saying, or reading something, or mimicking someone, what they're doing. For example, someone is showing you how to do something, like paying attention, looking at what they're doing, and then you can copy it, replicate the thing that they were doing. And that's how you learn new things through sensing. I personally like to call the sensing functions sometimes the copy-paste functions, because that really helps to remember what it's all about. Like, information starts somewhere, and it starts with sensing. That's the basis of everything. because sensing is about literal information, about real world, remembering it, and then possibly copying it. But no interpretations, that's for intuition. So if you want to be able to use sensing, try not to think too deeply about it, even if that's your natural thing. Just watch and copy, just be in the moment. Extroverted sensing can also be about like just reading something, just looking around you and just reading some text on a building or something, or on a car. It can also be about reading a recipe or reading a manual or something. Just reading what it says literally. That can be an example about extrovert sensing. So yeah, if you want to take in new information, you want to learn new things, it can be a very useful function because it helps you to stay focused. It helps you to pay attention and not get distracted and react quickly as well.